welcome back. Let's spend some time talking about the impact of connecting multiple switches together in concert with the construct known as VLANs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw two switches. Switch 1, and we'll draw switch 2. Now you see I'm emulating what I have over here, but we're not ready for this yet. I just want to sink this into your mind. Because the thing that we need to understand is that we have the possibility to where I could have devices, let's just say H1 and H2, that are part of the same VLAN. So what we'll do is we'll say H1 and H2 are part of the red VLAN. I call it red, you'll probably call it pink. I call it the marker that works. And then also I have the possibility of having another host. So let's talk about this host. Let's say that this host is host 3. And let's say that host 3 is in the blue VLAN. Now, we know right now that these devices, H1 and H2, can communicate to one another because they are part of the same VLAN. So the net effect here is it's kind of like they're in a switch all their own. H3 is in a switch all his own. Now what would end up happening is if I had a device down here that is going to be H4, and it is in the blue VLAN, H4. So what we want to do is we want to make certain that we have the capability of being able to get communication from H3 all the way across this infrastructure and down to H4 and any other devices that are part of this VLAN. Now the way that we do this is that we would actually come in and we will connect these devices via a link. Now one of the possibilities for me would be is I could actually come in here and I could have switch 1 and switch 2. And if I wanted to have dedicated connectivity, I could come in here and have a link that just allows the blue VLAN, and I could have a link that just allows the red VLAN, and set these up as what are called access ports. And everything will work perfectly fine. But if I had 50 VLANs, that means I have to have 50 discrete interfaces running between these switches and only allow a specific VLAN on each individual link, which is not really practicable. So what ended up happening was the terminology that we're employing here is a concept called a trunk. Now a trunk is a link, but an access port is also a port connected to a link. It's just an access port allows me to transport one VLAN. A trunk allows me to transport all or in VLANs. What I'm getting at and alluding to here is the fact that I can do filtration. Now, in Cisco's inventory, we have old school ISL, which is even dead. Interswitch link is an encapsulation method of being able to allow this to transpire. But it's pretty much gone the way of the dodo, and it's not even supported in data center. The solution that we use to do this is something called .1Q. It's going to be 802.1Q. That's what I was going to write. But I'll just say 802.1Q. 802.1Q trunking. Now what this does is this allows me to leverage the fact that we're operating, again, in transparent mode. When it comes to the method that I'm using to be able to bridge or switch. So I am a transparent mode bridge. This is a transparent mode bridge. So the object here is that what I do is I am going to, let me pick a color that I haven't used yet. I don't have a color that I haven't used yet. So we'll stick with blue. So what's going to, can't stick with blue. Let's see if green shows up any better. So I have a frame. So I'm sending these frames down, and it stands to reason that those frames that I'm sending down will ultimately be able to traverse this link and because of the fact that these two devices are in the same VLAN, they can communicate with one another. But it's the 802.1q trunk that makes this possible across the link between the two switches. So as an example, if H3 wanted to communicate to H4, I would be able to send packets, or frames, excuse me, across the link. And the problem here is that I need them to traverse this trunk that I just described and ultimately be able to be processed and sent down to where they ultimately reach their overall objective. Now, the problem with this is that if I had another host, so let's go in here and put in an H5. So host 5 is connected, and host 5 is in the red VLAN now. So it's going to be H5, H1, and H2. They're all part of the same configuration. Now, what I would end up doing is I would send information from this guy right here, and then that information would need to traverse this link and ultimately be sent to this destination. But the problem here is that I have two data flows. I have the one on the bottom and the one on the top. And the problem is that I want to be able to have a mechanism that's going to allow me to be able to isolate layer 2 traffic. So in other words, I want to make certain that I can distinguish the red VLAN traffic from the blue VLAN traffic. And the way that I do that in 802.1q is I am going to perform encapsulation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this information, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a header on it. I'm going to actually encapsulate it in such a way that what I'm going to see here is I'm actually taking these two pieces of information. Those are from the blue VLAN. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the information for the red VLAN, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark it in such a way that I know that it's going to be in the red VLAN across this link. This is encapsulation. Now, when it arrives across, I see, oh, it's in the blue VLAN, so I need to send it to all of the devices in the broadcast domain for the blue VLAN if it's a broadcast traffic, or if it's a delivered via the CAM table, the content addressable memory table, then what I can do is I could actually forward it. And this allows me to be able to have a single link between two switches that's going to actually be able to transduct or carry or deliver traffic for my VLANs. And you'll remember I said all or in. Now what that means is that all means by default. So by default, all VLANs are allowed. So every VLAN in my configuration is going to be allowed on my trunk unless I filter those VLANs. So what that means is that I have to actually go through and I can apply a manual filter, and there's technologies that allow me to be able to do the concept of dynamic filtering. We'll talk about VTP later on in our studies. We'll talk about bridge assurance later on in our studies. But right now, this is the key and most principal element when it comes to taking two switches and connecting them together in such a fashion that I'm going to be able to support multiple VLANs across this new interface type that we call a trunk. H1 is connected to switch 1, H2 is connected to switch 1, H3 is connected to switch 1, and they all are connected to access ports that's configured on the actual switch itself. So I go here and I tell this switch that this interface is part of VLAN blue, or in all actuality it would be a number, so it would be like VLAN 100. Do the same thing over here. They're all in VLAN 100. By virtue of the fact that these devices are connected via a trunk, I can actually carry data between the switches in an organized and isolated fashion. Once it arrives on the other end, I just de-encapsulate it and deliver it to whoever it needs to be delivered to based on looking up the destination MAC address in my content addressable memory table. So this supports everything at the end of the day and allows me to be able to create a topology that's going to have a shared, uniform layer 2 infrastructure, or like we say a lot of times in data center, a fabric. Now, we need to organize this a little bit better, because the moment we start doing redundant connectivity, i.e. if I had more than one link, or if I had 3 switches and they were all connected into what we call a loop, we have to be very, very careful, because we want to avoid ever allowing a process or a outcome known as a bridging or switching loop. We're going to talk about that in the next video. I'm Terry Vinson, and I'd like to thank you for learning data center with me.